in this next problem, we are finding the phase shift. So our problem is y equals negative 3 cosecant 1/5 x plus pi. So the first thing you need to do to figure out the phase shift is to factor out the number that tells you the number of repeats. So 1/5 tells us that there's 1/5 of a graph in 2 pi, right? So I'm going to factor that number out. So factor out the 1/5, and when you're factoring something out, that means you're dividing it, right? So dividing by 1/5 is the same thing as multiplying by 5. So if that number is pi, then that number would now change to 5 pi because I divided out a 1/5. That is the number for your phase shift. Only you have to make sure you go the right direction. So you either have to say the phase shift is what? Negative 5 pi, or you could just say 5 pi to the left. Okay, so that was the main thing you were supposed to do in that problem. However, I figured it wouldn't hurt for us to try again, finding the period and the asymptotes. So, since I just barely explained the last problem to you, will you quickly, right now, on your own, find the period and asymptotes for me? I'll give you a hint. It's not that bad, even though there's a plus pi in there, because plus pi doesn't change where they are, because remember how the asymptotes are always a distance of pi away from each other? So that plus pi in there is just moving over to the next asymptote. So it's not going to change where they are. In fact, adding that pi doesn't change this graph. Does it change it? Oh, it would change it because it changes where the minimums and maximums are, but it wouldn't change where the asymptotes are. Everybody's working on those. I know it was just a challenge question, but now I want you to actually do it. Okay. Let's talk through them now. You might not be quite done, but. So the normal period is 2 pi, but we have to take that and divide by 1/5 to get the actual period for this problem. So when you divide by 1/5, it's the same as multiplying by 5. So what's the period going to be? 10 pi, very good. And then the asymptotes for cosecant. Now, secant goes with cosine, and so therefore the asymptotes or pi have values. But cosecant goes with sine, and that means your first x-intercept is at 0, and then they're a pi distance apart. So, but in this case, because of the period being 10 pi, instead of them being pi apart, they're going to be how far apart? 5 pi apart. So the asymptotes that are normally at values of pi, because you have 0 pi and you have 1 pi and 2 pi and 3 pi, would be at x equals 5 pi instead. And the k just tells us, to go to the next one, multiply by the next number. So normally it would be k pi, because it's at 0 pi, 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, but because the period is 10, that means there's an asymptote at 0, and then at 5, and then at 10, because of that 1/5. And then the last thing, the range. What does this negative 3 do to the range of our cosecant graph? But instead of going between negative infinity and negative 1 and then 1 to infinity, what does that 3 do to it? Okay, so negative infinity to negative 3, and then 3 to infinity. So that was just a little quick question to see if you are, just one more thing to think about. Make sure we're putting it all together. Better? But do I still need to keep doing these and keeping you up on it?